As our program comes to an end, we face the ultimate challenge that each and every one of us should rise to the summons of truth, freedom and justice for liberty and prosperity, as long as we unite and come together.
Masalang nagaganap sa ating bayan, magkasamang mahirap at mayaman.
Napipisic man, may-ari at sundalo, naging langit ito, bahagi ng mundo.
Huwag muling payagan, hinira ng dilim, magsasama ng mahirap, bigyan ng pansin.
Magkakapatid lahat sa Panginoon. Kinapil ko 1986 tayo kanina. Tatawa si Mano.
Ba't yun ang kinanta? Ba't yun ang kinanta nila?
Kabayabang ang pagbabago.
Reduction ng lack of sa kabukiran.
Ikaw hirap gawin nun ah. Uy, pero ka. Agad-agad din yung babayaran. Kailangan na pala ni Dennis. Ang selos ng buhay.
Pauwi na ako, nandito na ako kaya.
Rider or ano.
Oo.
Chismos. Makikita tayo? Makikita ba tayo?
Dadaan na kita.
I think I'll have a train bring you back around this way. You gotta go. Oh, this way? Yeah, that way. This train, I think.
Okay, Martin, it's better. Can you, yeah, that's what I was supposed to say. Can you zoom it in on the speaker?
Yeah, that's good. That's cameras.
There's a preset on your equipment, or yeah, that's better. Oh.
No, I wasn't managing that class. Yeah.
It's good. Starting to move forward. Work on the cycles now. How long is this going to be?
An hour. So it'll be darker, but it'll get lighter here, I think. Oh, wait, now is that? Thumb glare into the light? No.
Ang galing-galing natin.
I guess I have.
Ang galing na.
Want to move it forward, you think? Is that okay, sir?
Okay,
You think something happened? I think it's just... Does that seem like kilter to you? I'm sitting. Okay. It's fine. I don't want to.
Raymond.
Wala pa. Sila pa lang nila. Si Martin.
We should try to pick up that corner.
Kennedy and Judge Wallace. Is it possible? What time are they arriving?
They should be here at 5 o'clock. Do you want him to? I got Trinity connect them together.
Well, as soon as Professor Pangalan is on his way, he's just downstairs.
Okay.
He would like to request that either they can be together or as soon as they come in, it could be one after the other, just to have some preliminary briefing.
Sure. Okay, Tara, let me contact Judge Wallace, the secretary, to arrange that.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned that.
Use the front one because that would be more of a, he's still allowed to ride through. Yeah, it's still, but
Martin.
Person, each individual, each citizen, the capacity to plan and shape his own destiny, her own future. Governments are always willing to plan your future for you. But it is an inherent right of the person to shape and to plan their own time, their own efforts, to devise their own dreams, to take their own risks. And this cannot really be done unless those persons have some means to live and to thrive, so that they can make choices. So that, in one sense, is how liberty and prosperity are necessarily linked. And as we continue to discuss this theme in more detail, of course we can add to this. There was a famous cartoon in the New Yorker magazine, and it showed two pilgrims on the Mayflower. And they had the hats with the big buckles that are part of the lore of the pilgrims that came to the United States, or to what was then America. And one pilgrim is saying to the other, my immediate objective is religious freedom. But in the long run, I want to get into real estate. But you see, the two are linked. It's only if you have some means to plan your own destiny and to make your own way that you can really enjoy freedom. And we can talk later about the particular role that the courts have in this process.
Thank you, Justice Kennedy. Judge Wallace?
Let me first apologize for my voice. I caught a cold and it's attacked me in the throat. But to the extent I can, I want to extend my greetings to all my many friends who are there in the auditorium today, and let you know that I would have accepted the invitation of the Chief Justice of the Philippines to be there had it not already been set that I would be here otherwise involved tomorrow. Let me make an introductory comment about how I see the program title that you've identified for us today. The first issue is safeguarding liberty. Now, as I see liberty, it has two facets. One is the liberty to make choices. And how do the courts fit in to help individuals make choices? Democracy allows most citizens to achieve their free choice. That is the benefit of democracy. Not that it always arrives at the right decision, but the majority of the people get to exercise their liberty choice. And this allows us to identify how we, as judges in courts in our various countries, can serve the interest of democracy and thus safeguard liberty. In my judgment, democracy is best served by a court which encourages the democratic process. That is, it allows the social issues to be decided at the ballot box rather than judges making determinations on their own as to what those choices should be. There's a second phase of liberty that it seems to me we should be concerned with, and that's the liberty to claim rights protected by the Constitution. Every citizen should have that liberty, which means that the doors of the court must be open to all people, rich and poor, powerful and weak, the disadvantaged, the lowly among us. Each of them must be guaranteed the liberty to claim protection under our Constitution. And I think, as far as we are concerned as judges, that we need to be vigilant and vigorous in the defense of the guaranteed constitutional rights, and that we make sure that those who are less fortunate and do not have power or prestige have an equal claim, an equal liberty to that protection. Now let me turn for just a minute to nurturing prosperity. I think the court's best influence here may be indirect rather than direct. Prosperity is usually achieved by a robust national economy. That is, when there's an economy that is growing, is dynamic, it's creating jobs for people, it's creating new industry, it's allowing an increase in the middle class. And so we turn to the economy itself in order to give prosperity to people. And achieving this frequently requires outside investments. That is, a robust economy just doesn't come. It comes because capital is being invested in developing businesses and industry. Now, investors will come to countries, especially developing countries, and invest when they are sure their investment is safe and that they have a reasonable return on their profit and that it can be secured. They frequently refer to this as developing an even playing field. That is, that people in the local country as well as investors have equal rights and will be treated equally and fairly. So the necessary protection is best guaranteed by an independent and responsive judiciary. If the judiciary is independent enough to stand up to government, to powerful business interests, and give the investor a fair chance under the laws of the country to be protected in his investment, then there's a greater likelihood that more investment will come to the country, that the economy will be improved, and it will result in greater prosperity. To the extent courts become independent and assure prompt disposition of litigation in a fair manner, the courts can play an important role in encouraging investment, which will, in my judgment, nurture prosperity. And that's the way I see our role as judges and courts in relationship to the two key issues that have been placed before us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Judge Wallace. We have heard from our colleagues from across the Pacific, And if I may borrow that wonderful example by Justice Kennedy of the pilgrims crossing the oceans to build a new world hospitable to religious freedom, and wonderfully found excellent real estate. I now turn to my seatmate, the Solicitor General of Singapore. They have very limited real estate over there, the city-state of Singapore. They have, as Judge Wallace noted, they have developed their economy into one of the most powerful economies in Asia. They have borrowed many of the Western institutions of governance, but with a certain unique Singaporean touch, which I will leave to the Solicitor General to develop.
Thank you. Indeed, we have very little real estate, a very large area of 660 square kilometers, that's about all, in this city-state of Singapore. First, actually, I would like to congratulate you, Chief Justice Pangaliban of the Philippines, for inspiring and spearheading this global forum to promote the twin beacons of liberty and prosperity as a philosophy and as a policy imperative. It is timely and is indeed said by someone that it's timeless that such a conference is initiated to forge international understanding of the key principles of liberty and prosperity and to discuss how the challenges to their fulfillment may be overcome. In my view, where there is good governance, it can hopefully lead to achieving liberty and prosperity. I think good governance is the key foundation stone that would underpin the objectives of liberty and prosperity, which is the focus of today's conference. Now, what are the ingredients of good governance? I do not propose to give an exhaustive list, but having a strong, independent judiciary is fundamental to good governance. There must be healthy respect for the rule of law from all important stakeholders, and that includes the legislative and executive branches of government. Hence, enlightened and responsible government will respect the rule of law. I go further to say that it will or should act to promote the rule of law, and it must always uphold the Constitution within which many of the fundamental liberties are usually safeguarded and entrenched. Enlightened and responsible government will work towards strengthening the judiciary and not undermine or emasculate it. It must provide the necessary budgetary and financial resources to enable the judiciary to perform its judicial function well, to interpret the law, and to decide always fairly and justly in accordance with the law. And in Singapore, you might be add, the judges are paid reasonably well, so that the temptation of corruption is completely removed, hopefully. Well, another point would be that enlightened and responsible government will in fact build into the Constitution and the legal framework a proper and effective system of checks and balances and work to preserve that balance. I mean, in Singapore, we do have a system where we have an elected president who holds the second key. Although the president would always have to act on the advice of the cabinet, but when we had this elected president institutionalized, he had a second key in the sense that he safeguards the government's reserves. The government cannot spend those reserves of the previous government without the sanction or the concurrence of the elected president. And he also has the power to veto important appointments. So that eliminates the possibility of nepotism and people who are of dubious character being put in place of positions of responsibility. I've got other points, but I think time is short, and I'll pass the mic back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor General. In Asia, the most successful constitutional experiments have usually been in the countries who have borrowed the British traditions of governance. And I would like to turn to Justice Dury of New Zealand to speak about the constitutional order that it has built from its British origins. Justice Dury.
Yes. Thank you, Dean. The question is, how much have we borrowed from the British tradition? we initially borrowed all of it. New Zealand was settled in 1840, and in 1843 it passed the English Laws Act, which said that all the laws of England apply, save to the extent that they are applicable to the circumstances of a colony. That has been the position up until very recently, when we have realized that some of our circumstances are not quite the same, and we are now developing our own jurisprudence and have marked this by developing as our superior court the Supreme Court, which now is the final court of appeal and replaces the Privy Council. But when I say that we borrowed heavily from English law, we have borrowed in one other respect as well, in that we do not have a written constitution in New Zealand. That is to say, our constitutional status is not determined by reference to one single document, but that the Constitution is spread over a number of statutes, conventions, and unwritten principles. In that respect, we were unfortunate that we have never had in New Zealand a civil war, a revolution, or a coup, or any of those things that remind the citizens of the importance of having a constitution. And we have yet to develop that far. In that respect, we follow the English tradition. But I was interested to hear Justice Kennedy refer to liberty and prosperity as a shorthand for something much larger. For us, that shorthand is probably expressed in the concepts of the rule of law and the principles of universal human rights. And the remarkable thing is that in forming the Supreme Court, under the Supreme Court Act of 2003, the legislature wrote in that the judges were to consider the law having regard to the principles of the rule of law. The other matter in relation to universal human rights is that New Zealand has a long tradition now of being guided in its decisions by universal human rights instruments as a major source of principle. So that in looking to prosperity, we would probably turn more to the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, which translates prosperity substantially in terms of the right of all persons to a reasonable standard of living. However, in New Zealand, I think and hope that we have in fact achieved that, in fact, and so that is not a major issue for us. Key to a great deal of this is ensuring an independent judiciary, and that means also a constraint on executive discretion and occasionally judicial discretion to ensure that law is certain in advancing the rule of law. We also see a sound judicial system as absolutely integral to a climate for investment in our country. It's been taken by the Supreme Court in the Philippines to developing an independent judiciary by ensuring that it meets certain standards. Now, when I was first made a judge, that was in 1974, respect for the judiciary was assumed. Now in New Zealand, and it seems throughout the world, respect must be earned. And so we too are looking at those processes by which judges and the courts maintain the respect of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Dury. May we turn to the one country, I consider the Philippines to be the one jurisdiction in the world which has copied the American system of governance and of law very, very closely. and at the same time has transplanted these institutions out here to the Philippines. And Chief Justice Panganiban?
Thank you. I'd like to say that indeed we admire the system in New Zealand, which followed the British system. And as Justice Dury aptly said, they have no written constitution, and yet they're very constitutional. They have had no revolution, and yet they have been able to transform and reform their society so that the people enjoy both liberty and prosperity to the maximum, and they're happy about it. It's strange that England does not have also a written constitution, and yet historically we borrow our concepts of liberty from England, specifically from the Magna Carta, which was in writing, the first written document on human rights. Of course, that was followed by the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and also our own struggle in the Philippines that involved revolution also. Now, as Din Pangalangan said, the Philippines follow the structure of the U.S. government. Not only the structure of the U.S. government, but what we call the Constitution of Liberty of the United States, where we have a written guarantee of the rights of the people listed in the Bill of Rights. It's true that liberty is a traditional area wherein the judiciary has been at work for many centuries. Even now, however, the concepts of liberty are changing with the times. For instance, at present, the threats of terror have given a need to calibrate liberty again vis-a-vis the need for security. The anti-money laundering law, which is almost universal from country to country. It's true, it is enacted by the legislature, but there is a model law. And the effect of the anti-money laundering law is not merely national, but universal. So while we have traditional freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, yet the information age, the age of even the biotechnology have brought in needs to calibrate our concepts of liberty. And now we go to prosperity. While in the past, it would appear that the judiciaries of the world were not too concerned with the needs of prosperity, essentially now, there is a widening and deepening need for the judiciaries to focus also on prosperity, borne by many developments which I outlined yesterday during my keynote address. But suffice it to say that the international developmental agencies have focused on this, believing that there can be no meaningful alleviation of poverty unless there is in place a strong, stable, independent rule of law sustained by a strong, independent judiciary. On this, I think we can agree that alleviation of poverty and the nurturing of prosperity is as much a concern of the judiciary as it is of every sector of society, as it is of the other branches of government. True, the judiciary is passive in general, but that passivity should not be taken as a hands-off on the issues of prosperity. Maybe we can take off from there, having heard our two learned magistrates from the United States. Maybe they can respond now.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Justice Kennedy, Judge Wallace.
Well, I don't wish
to foreclose this panel from taking any number of different directions. We are living in an age of globalization, which means increasing interdependence. My children will have less control as Americans over their own destiny in politics, economics, culture, than any previous generation of Americans. That's both good and bad. But they have less control because we are necessarily linked with so many other countries. It's an irony, a paradox, that as we become more technologically advanced, we're more vulnerable. As we become more technologically linked, we become more dependent on other peoples. This means that we have an obligation to reach out to a doubting world, to explain the meaning of democracy and freedom. Make no mistake on it, my friends. The verdict is out. People around the world are suspending judgment on democracy. Now, I wonder, Chief Justice Panagan-Mon, if it's the principal obligations of the court, or if the courts have the principal resources or institutional capacity to alleviate poverty and suffering. Consider the question of water. There are 6 billion people on this earth of humankind. Over 2 billion have no adequate drinking water. The biggest single cause of death among infants is diarrhea and other diseases from waterborne toxins. I heard a lecture not so long ago about the condition of the people of Africa in relation to clean water. And the speaker said that over 8 billion hours of human effort every year are devoted just to bringing clean water to the home. And this is a work that falls on women. And it falls disproportionately on women. How long will it take for the world to address this problem? This is not rocket science.